What's keeping you up at night? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bedtime Edit podcast. I am your host, Alanna McGinn. And as you know, this podcast is going to talk about sleep and sleep health and issues, but mainly the topics we're going to be talking about are things that are keeping us up at night during midlife. And this topic, unfortunately, is a little near and dear to my heart, and it definitely can keep us up at night, and the topic is divorce. So we have some amazing guests that are going to be joining us. They are divorce mediators, they are podcast hosts, but before we get to them, I want to touch on a couple of stats that I pulled. I will put the sources of these stats in the show notes. These were updated in January 2025. And the stats show that the number of divorces in Canada in 2020 was at its lowest in 1973. A big part of that is they were saying because of COVID, because of the pandemic, more and more people postponed their divorce because they couldn't access the court systems and things like that. Also, we're seeing a rise in common law marriages. So common law marriages mean you don't have to get a divorce. This one made me laugh because unfortunately this was not my situation. The average length of divorce proceedings in 2024 is 4 to 6 months. Mine was almost 2 years while I lived with my ex. Marriages in Canada last on average 15 years, which makes sense because they're also showing, most marriages start at the age of 30. So that makes sense for the next stat, which shows Canadians in their early to mid 40s are most likely to divorce. And I want to dive into that one with our guests coming up. And like I said, common law relationships are more and more on the rise, with an increase of 15% between 1981 and 2016. And I'm sure we would see an increase from 2016 to now. So let's dive into the topic of divorce. Again, from experience, I know that this was something that I lost a lot of nights of sleep on as I went through this age or this stage of my life. And today I am so excited to have on Amanda Silver and Alex Howard. They are divorce mediators. They are now the hosts of the Dirty Laundry podcast, which I listen to and love. And on their podcast, they talk all things divorce, trying to banish the stigma of divorce with adding a lot of laughs, which is why it's so great. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
We're so happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So did any of those stats shock you? Do you agree? Do you maybe disagree with some of them from what you see in your practices?
You know, I think you hit the nail on the head with the common law issue because I think the separations are still happening, but the divorce per se maybe is reduced because a lot of people are choosing to engage in common law relationships rather than become legally married.
But just to clarify, Amanda and I do common law separation. So we will mediate and negotiate those separations as well. I think for like a stats can kind of perspective, they have lumped them into separate categories.
But a lot of it's the same. Like the parenting's
100%.
all the same. The child support's the same. Even the spousal support, can be similar too. The only real difference is the property section.
Yeah. So it's just like property law that's different. And then Alanna, the only other stat that made us giggle was the 4 to 6 months. Like that's just
right.
I don't know who pulled that out of where, but that is absolutely incorrect. I mean, listen,
okay,
mediation,
so I'm not an anomaly here. Like that, it happens where it's long term and you're still living with your ex.
Yeah.
Even the most amicable, you go right to a mediator, so you're doing it quickly. Even that is going to take, many months, up to a year. That's why in Canada we have, you need to be separated for a year to get your divorce because it takes that long to go through all the financials and value properties. And it's a lot.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of cohabitation after separation. So I think you even mentioned that, right? Folks having to live together while they go through this. And that's just simply the cost of living is astronomical these days. And so folks don't really have an alternative. So now imagine your divorce is taking potentially years and you're still cohabitating while going through these really intense, difficult conversations. It's it's tough. It's really tough. But yeah, 4 to 6 months would be a dream.
Well, so it's funny. I mean, I'm not going to, just talk about my divorce on this podcast, and it will come up just because it's what I relate to. But when I was going through my divorce, my sister was also going through a divorce, my poor parents. And hers was that 4 to 6 months. It was like easy breezy, and yeah, that was not my situation. And like you said, it's not a lot of individual situations. And I do see in talking to more and more people, cohabitation happens during that separation or during that separation time because of working out the separation agreements and all of that. Which brings us to the emotional aspects of divorce. Emotions run high. I mean, you go through grief, fear, frustration, anger, happiness, all of it. For myself, being the person who ended the marriage, you still go, even if you're the individual who ended the marriage, you still go through a period of grief. You're grieving what you thought your future would be. I have 3 kids, 3 teens. You're grieving, the shift and transition for them. What do you see as common emotional journeys, I guess, that you see that your clients go through? And how do you see them kind of come out of that on the other side?
I think the key is to remember that it's not linear, that it's not like you're going to start here and be sad or resentful or angry, and then you're going to sign some papers and you're going to feel spectacular. Like, I think it's really key for folks to remember that it comes in waves. It rears its ugly head when you least expect it. So you could be participating in an activity that brings you such joy, and all of a sudden you're overcome with grief. And that's okay. And that's normal. And that's to be expected. And so I think just managing the expectations, a lot of people try and rush through the process to get to that finish line, thinking then it'll all be over and they'll be happy and they'll have moved on. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. So with that, take your time, make decisions when you are maybe riding lower on the emotional, wave, if you will, so that you can have rational, clear decision making, knowing that it's not going to change the second you sign those paperwork. So just don't rush the process.
And it's also not going to change just because you jump into another relationship. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of people think that, I will heal my heart by finding someone new and jumping into another relationship. It doesn't work that way. So if you start up a new relationship right away and you haven't fully healed, you haven't fully dealt with all of those emotions, it's going to come up in your new relationship as well. And it's hard to hide that from a new partner, right? Mm-hmm. When you're going through that grief.
Absolutely. It's, I'm touching on what you said about it not being linear and rushing through to get to that other side, to get to that happiness. I know that was something that played a role with me. There was a lot of frustration and if anyone is listening to this and in the midst of going through it, it's like you can't imagine it ending. You think that this is how it's going to be forever. You can't even picture the other side of the divorce because you're so deep into it. And for myself, I was fortunate where I had a great support team, and we'll talk about that, family, friends, my lawyer. I was ready to rush through it. And doing that would have hurt me financially down the road because I just wanted it to be over. I wanted it to be done. I wanted to get to that other side of happiness. So yeah, it's if anyone's listening right now, I will say you will get to that other side. This isn't going to be your life forever. It's never gonna, unfortunately, especially if you're co-parenting. That's a whole other episode. You're always gonna go through that, but you will get to the other side. But sometimes when you're knee deep in it, it's like a never-ending thing. It feels like it.
You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think again, if there are folks out there listening, remembering too that the other person is on their own emotional journey. And I know we don't really have a lot of empathy for our ex when we're going through a divorce, but if you rush them, that's also going to come back and bite you in the ass because they're going to be dealing with this grief and these emotions in their own way. And what's that going to impact your life, your children, your future? So I think also being cognizant that there are 2 people in this relationship, there are 2 people in this divorce, and everyone is on their own emotional journey. And kind of ride those waves as best you can.
And you mentioned making decisions sort of in haste to move things along. And I think that is it's a dangerous thing that can happen. You know, you're so eager to just make this go away. It's like you don't want to deal with this anymore. And people make sort of rash decisions without, you know, financially or parenting, without really thinking them through and giving them the time that they need. And then later on, regret it.
Yes. And be left with sleepless nights because you're ruminating. What if? Oh, what should I have done? Yeah. That's what causes us to lose out on sleep, to lose out on, you know, sort of being emotionally present in our job as parents, as whatever. You got to be able to show up. So
learning
make
to
the
let
decisions
go
when
is
you can.
big too. Yeah, learning to let go is big. I know that was something you're always, you know, you're constantly trying to win the fight in whether it be with an argument, whether it be financially, whether it be in anything. And the act of learning, that's a lot that I work with my clients, is just the simple act of learning to let stuff go, which is hard, but necessary, because those ruminating thoughts will definitely keep you up at night and stay with you all day. And going back to what you said about, we have to be aware of your ex's journey as well. I know that was something for me. You know, if you are the individual who makes the decision, something I have to factor in is I had months, years, let's be honest, of preparing for this, right? And I mean, you know, those that hear it aren't always blindsided by it, though they can be. You have to allow the other person to come up to speed with you and to go through that process. I mean, that's only the fair thing to do. And I know that's something that I probably, because I wanted to fast forward everything just to get to the other side, but I had to allow him time to catch up to me. And that wasn't something that I was aware of. I always say it was my first divorce, right at the beginning. But it was something that I had to learn to do, and something that I felt bad in the beginning because I was so ready to, like, let's move forward, let's do this. And he was just catching his breath for the whole thing. So that's a good tip too, is you have to allow the other person to get to where you are if you are the one that has made that decision.
It's much like a pregnancy. So if you're, you know, in a cis heteronormative relationship, you have 9-10 months to wrap your head around it as the mom. And then all of a sudden we just like hand this baby over to dad, and they're like, I need another minute to catch up. And I find it very similar to making that decision, especially since most divorces are initiated by the women. We do think about it a long time before we come to the finality of that decision. And often the men folk do need a minute to catch up.
Yeah. So you mentioned the financial part of things and not rushing through it, because that can bite you in the butt financially. So let's talk about that. There's the emotional side of divorce, but there's also the practical side of divorce, right? So court, financials. Also, there's an American study that suggests that women's median income for the year of their separation or divorce dropped by about 30% more than men. And this is from justice.gc.ca. And then it also shows that it impacts women more than men. So in terms of financial loss for women coming out of divorce, studies show that there is that drop. If you can give any advice to someone who is listening to this and maybe just starting the divorce process or considering the divorce process, where would you say would be the best place for them to start?
Well, you know, we're biased to mediation, but I do think that there is something to that, to speaking with a mediator first.
Can you explain the difference of that then? So working with a mediator versus working with a family lawyer.
Yeah. You want me to? Sure.
Yeah,
sure. So really quick, we see it kind of as two categories: mediation or litigation. So a mediator is somebody who works for both parties. We are a third-party neutral working really for the family unit. So especially if there's children involved, I always say I work for the kids. My focus is what's in the best interest of the children. That's what we're going to use as a benchmark for kind of every decision. Mediation is wonderful because it's self-derived. So the clients are the ones making the decisions. Your mediator is just guiding you through the process. They're asking you questions, things that you need to consider, like we're prompting what decisions need to be made. And then we're facilitating with negotiation, with communication, with conflict de-escalation, that sort of thing. If you go not the legal route, but a lawyer route or a litigation route, each party is then hiring their own lawyer, who is then representing their individual needs. So don't get us wrong, there's a time and place for both, but I find personally in my practice and from my experience, a separation agreement that is created by the people that are actually having to follow it has much long lasting, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it'll actually have longevity.
It'll stand the test of time longer.
Exactly.
And the commitment to it, if lawyers draw it up and the clients, skim it over and sign it, they don't really have that accountability as they would if they were involved in every, decision that went into it and the drafting of it and the language that's used. I just think it stands the test of time more.
Yeah. And listen, every family is unique. Every partnership, even in, the disillusion of it, is unique. You have different needs. And so as a mediator, it's not our job to make those decisions for you. It's our job to encourage you to make those decisions for yourselves. So if you were to hire lawyers, if you don't need to necessarily end up in court. The lawyers can go back and forth and, you present an offer and then they counter and it kind of goes back and forth that way. So mediation, you sit together with one person who is guiding you through the process, typically way more cost effective and also way more efficient in time. So there's a lot of pros to mediation. And again, we're 100% biased, but understanding that, do you want to make the decisions that are going to impact your family and your future? Or would you rather somebody else make those for you?
And it's not to say that you can't sort of do both. Mediation is the beautiful part about it is that we can work with one issue or all the issues. So for example, let's say I have a file right now where the lawyers are dealing with the finances and I'm doing the parenting plan.
Yeah, because I was going to say, you can work with both together, right? If you're listening to this and you're working with a lawyer, you can still work with a mediator as well.
Yeah, and lawyers actually have a duty to encourage you to at least try mediation before you go the litigation route. So it's very common that I'll have lawyers in the mediation or we're meeting after the mediation with both sides. Because there is definitely a time and a place for them, but it's not an either or.
Okay. Good to know. It's a conversation that you need to have. And then also something that you need to agree upon with, it's a conversation that you need to have with the person that you're going through the divorce with on which is the best route to take. But like I said, you can also do both. So coming back to the original question, what would you say would be the first step that someone should take in terms of the more practical steps of a divorce?
I think the first step is to meet with a professional, a consultation, so that whether it's a mediator, whether it's a family lawyer, and that can even be before you let the other person know that the relationship is over, just so that you have an idea of what you're in for, what your, entitlements might be if you're meeting with a lawyer, what the process looks like. I've had so many, especially women I found, come to me and they're like, oh, I'm going to be kicked out of my house. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to be left without a penny. And I'm like, take a step back. Yeah. There's a law for a reason for this situation. So I think that having that knowledge before you even make the decision or once the decision has just been made can really empower people to, choose the right process for them.
Yeah, it's the financial part of it is scary, and I think more so for women. For me, it was doing that. It was making sure that I was going into it with as much information as I could get, putting a great team together that I could before going in, and finding out about the financial, for a lot of women, finding out the financial health of themselves and their marriage that maybe they didn't really look into. So, just not really diving too much into my situation, but, my ex was a financial planner. So he always handled all of that stuff. I mean, that's no fault to him or myself. That's just how our marriage worked. So I think that was one of the best things that I did was before even saying it out loud to anyone, I made sure I knew financially where we stood, where I stood, if I was to leave the marriage. And I think that's always one of my biggest tips to
And
any
sometimes
woman.
There are situations where you can't prepare, right? Where the other person has made the decision. It's very drastic and it's, the person's sort of in shock. Right. But even then, before you make any decisions, get information from professionals.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, that was 50% of the reason why Amanda and I just started the podcast, is there is such a barrier to entry in terms of getting the legal information that folks require. So you're either putting down large retainers to ask your lawyer questions, or you're trying to Google stuff that's written in legalese. And, you know, if this is your first divorce and you're not a trained lawyer, how in the world, you know, can you really navigate that? So finding the resources that are free, that are accessible. There is so much information out there. There's great, you know, even Instagram accounts where people are just giving free information. They're putting it in layperson's terms so that we can empower folks to make these decisions with all of the information that they need to do so. Right? You need to be able to make an informed decision. And the only way to do that is to start asking questions, is to build a team of experts, is to ask for help. And unfortunately, there's so much shame and stigma around this topic that people don't talk about it until you're in it. And then folks are like, oh my God, you should have seen my divorce. I did. And you're like,
yeah, then you get all the advice.
Right?
Yeah.
Where were you?
The advice comes too late.
Yes.
Yeah, I did notice that too. It's hearing individuals like you and you know, people on Instagram and things like that. I wish I had more of that community when I was going through it, for sure.
And as do I. I went through it myself too, which is part of the reason why I'm in this industry. And I wish I had, you know, a podcast to listen to or something that I could actually get, you know, real information that didn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
But again, you know, you live and you learn. But
you live and you learn.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, hopefully that's what this. I mean, that is definitely what your podcast is, and hopefully that's what this episode will help others too. So, coming back to sleep and what's keeping. I know nothing made me wake up with my heart racing more during my divorce than thinking of my financial future and going through the financial process of the divorce. Yeah. What do you find are some of the major pitfalls for women coming out of divorce that they see financially, for women specifically?
I think really quickly, you kind of hit the nail on the head, is we do typically have a division of roles in our marriages. And whether that's gendered from, you know, money, the man handles the money and the woman handles the kids, or however your relationship looks, a lot of that is just necessity. Why would you have two people doing the same job? There's too many jobs to do in a marriage, in a family. So we do divide and conquer. That being said, if you're not the person handling the finances, it is like learning a new language while you are in the depths of despair. So I think my advice is always manage your expectations. Why in the world would you know these things? So don't, again, be afraid to ask for help, to admit that you don't know. I would always rather someone did that than tried to, you know, be performatively engaged in the finances when they really don't know. So understanding and managing your expectations and knowing that we all have limitations and there's nothing wrong with that. But be prepared for like the world's worst audit. Like if you can imagine being audited, that's what it's like, only worse. And so manage those expectations. It's going to be rough, but also know that in Canada, we have legal entitlements to the other person's financial disclosure. You have the legal right to know everything. Yeah. So there's no point in hiding. There's no point in playing games. Don't worry about, oh, what's the mediator or what's my lawyer going to think? Because we don't care. We have no thoughts around, oh, you don't know your money? Shame on you. That's not how we operate. We would rather you just say, hey, I have no idea. Please help me with this. And then we can navigate that together. But really, expectation management is, for me, always my number one piece of advice.
I love that. Definitely. Financial education was something that I definitely went through after, or just going through the process. I had to. But now moving forward, you know, financial education for me is huge. And I mean, listen, I it's not like I didn't have any, but it was important for me to have more. And having two daughters, I have 3 kids, having 2 daughters, I mean, that is a conversation that we are always having, always understand what your financial situation is, you know, what role you play in it, and always never share a bank account with anybody. That's my next piece of advice. Okay, so you're coming out of the divorce, especially for women. Now, you mentioned about getting into new relationships and things like that. You know, this is probably more so with topics that you've had on your own podcast. It's not really to do with like the legalities of things, but how do you find that women are able to, you come out of the divorce and you're like, okay, who am I? I got married at, in my 20s. I am now in my 40s. I am a completely different person than I was then. And now here I am, a single woman with kids or not kids. How do I find out who I am? What is a great first step in figuring out how to navigate this new life that I've started?
It's a totally new, you feel like you need to take on a new identity. I think it's more about finding who you are. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I kind of lost myself during that relationship, especially if it was a toxic relationship. But I think it goes back to, what are you interested in? What are your passions? Because if you follow those, you'll find your people. And so, for example, when, after my divorce, I went back to school and I went into this field, and I found that I'm passionate about podcasting and fitness and in travel and just things that I liked, that made me happy. So I really think that it's about leaning into those interests.
Yeah. And divorce can be all consuming. It will literally take up every single thought, every minute of the day. Yeah. And you have to have the awareness that that's going to happen and it's totally normal. And then how do you counteract it? Hobbies. Honestly, I mean, I am not divorced, but my kids are now entering sort of that teenage years. And I'm like, oh, I have a little bit more free time. They don't need me as much. What do I like to do? And I'm like literally going through, what the city of Toronto programs has to offer. I'm like, I'm going to do a pottery class. I'm going to pick up a book. It's just giving yourself permission to do those kinds of things, even while you're going through the divorce, and then certainly afterwards. And I think as well, if you are entering into a co-parenting relationship, you're only going to have your kids part-time, right? And so now you have free time. And so to help with co-parenting, to not be worrying about your kids or trying to micromanage your ex on their parenting time, you have to distract. So whatever that is for you, try and fail. Like try and fail and try something new, and don't be afraid to kind of get your hands a bit messy and have some fun again. You have to process and you have to grieve and you have to go through all of that, but you're also allowed to have some fun.
You don't have to be miserable just because, you owe it to everybody else. Well, they know I'm getting divorced, so I can't be enjoying myself on this vacation or at this restaurant. Or you don't owe anybody anything.
You owe yourself to have some fun and to live your life. You really, that's the only person you owe anything to.
And your kids.
And your kids, for sure.
Your kids.
But it's the old adage, put your oxygen mask on first, right? You're no good at parenting. You're no good to your children if you are in a puddle every day, or you're feeling guilty because how dare you have some fun while your life is in shambles. Screw that. That's someone else's narrative. Go have some fun. Go explore. Don't be afraid to try new things. And I don't know, I always look at my kids and I'm like, they're up for anything. They don't have this sense of consequence. And obviously that's somewhat dangerous, but they're just willing to try. They're willing to look silly. And I think we as adults kind of get a bit boring. So I just say, go have some fun and get a little messy and make some mistakes.
Yeah, and
my
coming back to say
that, get messy, make mistakes.
She knew what she was talking
Miss Frizzle
about.
really guides our life. for
coming
any
back
90s,
to
the millennials out there.
The co-parenting, it's also okay to not be, and this is, I'm saying this to every mom that is listening, it's also okay to not be completely in a puddle or devastated when you don't have your kids. And you're going to go, that's a roller coaster of emotions. Now, my divorce, my kids were older. They were in their teens. I think if they were younger, it would have been much harder for me to be away from them. We have a 50-50, a pretty good, more parallel parenting probably than co-parenting, but a pretty good relationship with that. And the kids have transitioned with the divorce really well. So if they were younger, it would definitely have been harder. But there are times, and they're probably going to listen to this podcast, and I'm really sorry, guys, if you do. But there are times when I'm sending them off to their dads, and I'm like, bye-bye. You know what I mean? And then there's times where I'm like, oh, we just had a really good, 5 days, and I'm going to miss them. So it's a different roller coaster of emotions. But for everyone listening, don't feel bad when there are those days where you're like, oh my God, I can't wait to have a day to myself. And like you said, find joy and happiness in something you want to do. That's okay too.
Sometimes my friends, because I'm in a similar situation, and my friends will say to me, oh, you mean you get to sleep in this weekend and then go for brunch.
I sure do.
And then go out and stay out as late as you want. And they're like, that sounds lovely. And I'm like, sometimes it is. Like, of course, yeah, there is that roller coaster of like, you yearn for your kids, but it's also, I find as a single mom, when I'm with my kids, I am on 300%, right? I'm in overdrive because it's just me. And so I need some of that downtime to reconnect with me and what I need and refuel. Whether it's for me, I find it's sleep, because when I'm with my kids, I'm not sleeping like I do when I'm not. Yeah. So for me, I find like I use those weekends to like catch up on the Z's because I realize how much I need it.
Yeah. I mean, stress management plays such a big role in sleep. So, a lot of my clients, I'm working on their sleep health, but we're also working on stress management and learning proper coping skills. And going through divorce, you definitely have to do that. So something as simple as what we've just talked about is finding happiness and joy. Whether you're going through a divorce, whether you're happily married, in whatever stage you are in life, there's no reason why you can't find 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day. If you are co-parenting, you've got 5 days in a row of just doing something that brings you joy. It doesn't have to cost a lot. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant, but it's just for you. And that is so important, because when we are finding more happiness and joy throughout the day, that then is following us into bedtime and following us into our night's sleep and helping us sleep a lot better, because our stress levels aren't through the roof, and allowing us to get a great night of sleep. So happiness matters. Community matters. I know that's something that I really was very fortunate. I know not everyone is, but was very fortunate through my process that I was able to have a great community around me and found a good therapy. I cannot stress this enough. What are your thoughts on therapy through the divorce process?
Oh my gosh.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love
so
it.
important.
Yeah. I love it for everyone, full stop. But
divorce aside,
through a divorce, especially if you are going a more litigious route, if you're using a lawyer. I mean, listen, we are not therapists. Mediation is not therapy. It can be very therapeutic because we are forcing a lot of conversations. We're allowing folks to sit in discomfort and in conflict so that we can grow and go past it. So there's therapeutic, benefits to it, but oh my God, have someone to talk to. Yeah, and if you don't have a relationship with, whether it's friends or, family members, or if you just want to keep your business private, you need support. You absolutely 100% cannot do it alone, and you do not have to do it alone. Again, we're so shrouded in shame. We don't need to. 50% of marriages end in divorce. Who are we kidding? Like, the stats are there. It's happening. It's happening to a lot of people. And so if we can actually band together and find that village, find that community, it asks a lot. You have to be vulnerable. You have to, be pretty honest. And some of that can be ugly.
It can be draining too, because, you're going through the divorce, you're dealing with all of that, and that's emotionally exhausting. And then to go into a therapy session and just let it all out can be as well. But there's definitely a benefit to just venting to someone who's there to listen.
Especially if that means you're not going to be venting to your ex.
Or your lawyers.
Or your lawyer. Or,
I did want to say that for everyone listening, your lawyers are not your therapists, and stop using them as therapists, because you are going to pay through the nose for that. Yeah. So that's
and they're not trained in that. So it's a waste of money. That's not their skill set. They have their own skill set. That's very important. Find somebody that can actually support your emotional journey through divorce.
Yeah. For me, therapy, I went through a lot of therapy throughout the divorce. And for me, I found it more so helpful, obviously, on working on myself. That was the biggest thing. The biggest takeaway that I got from my therapy was you can only control how you respond. You can't control other people's behaviors. Yeah. And, I wish I had learned it earlier in my divorce, because there was a lot of moments that I'm not proud of myself throughout that process. Definitely, I can own that. But it did, I would say halfway through, it in changing how I responded to certain things and how I behaved to certain things, I think it benefited, especially my kids, it benefited my own health. And it was, unfortunately with therapy, it's expensive. Not everyone can access it. But if you can, like you said, full stop, everyone should be in therapy, but definitely throughout a divorce, therapy saved me 100%. Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's end it up. This was great. I love this. We're going to have you guys on again because this is always just, I think it's just so, it's such informative information that people need to know, and then in turn will help them sleep better. What is one piece of advice that you would give to someone, a woman listening right now, who maybe feels lost and scared about the future, whether it be financially, emotionally, whatever? What would be one piece of advice you'd give them, or multiple?
This will pass. This feeling of my world is crumbling will pass. Time will be your best friend. The clarity that you will have in a year from now, you will be amazed at how far you've come and how far you've grown. So hang in there.
The kids will be okay. The kids will be okay. Let go of the guilt. It's the long-term conflict that has a lasting effect on your children. So think that this is short term, right, Amanda? This too shall pass. It is going to. How do you want to show up for your kids? And Alanna, you hit it. Like, how are you going to react? The other person is no longer your concern. Focus on yourself. Focus on being the best parent you can be. The kids will be okay.
Yeah, I love that. You know, you hear so much. I remember actually hearing I don't know if it was she was a therapist, a psychotherapist, I can't remember, but she actually said that you should stay in a marriage for the kid. It was like just mind-boggling.
Yeah, no.
And that blows my mind because I know that was a big one for me, and I know for many women, it's you end up stepping back and you think this isn't, forget about me, forget about my ex. It wasn't a marriage I wanted that either one of us deserved, him included. But this wasn't a marriage that I would want for my kids. So why do I want them to grow up thinking that this is what a marriage should be, you know? So again, it's a decision that you have to make, but your kids will be okay. I love that. Other than the Dirty Laundry podcast, which you can find anywhere that you can download podcasts, we will put in the show notes. Where can everyone find you?
So we're on YouTube, the Dirty Laundry Divorce Podcast. Just search it on YouTube and like and subscribe, please.
Yes, please.
And we're also on Instagram, dirty.laundry.podcast. So there's a lot of reels with helpful information, some giveaways. We have a lot of fun on there. So check us out.
My private practice is Midtown Mediation, and Amanda is at Forest Hill Mediation. So if you want to work with us, you can find us online.
Amazing. And we will put all those links in our show notes. Thank you so much, ladies, for coming on.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. And that was one topic that is definitely keeping us up at night. So hopefully all this information is going to help you get a little bit of a sounder sleep. Until next time.